So you're just kind of meeting people on the street and meeting them where they are, and that kind of drives what you sort of specialize in, is that these things you study are because of the people that you've met.
Yeah, and so that's literally what happened with Islam. So I listened to some apologists and read certain apologists who specialize in Islam, even though it wasn't a major part of my regular everyday experience. So I had this certain amount of almost like preemptive background information and knowledge that it was just like the Lord was kind of putting into me, but I didn't really have an outlet. But one day, I remember the conversation. I was on the street, and I was talking to one of the aggressive neo-atheists, and it was a female and a couple other. I forget who she had with her, but there was a bunch of atheists around in this sort of crowd. But the one I was talking to was this gal that was really aggressive, and how stupid God was because of what he did with the eye, and how stupid he was because of his dumb designs relating to the back and the vertebrae and the spine. It was the stupidest thing, and all this. And I was kind of just listening to her at this stage in the conversation, and I kind of caught it out of my eye. It was like this. It was this weird moment, and it was almost like symbolic of a turn of dealing with atheists primarily to Muslims. I see a guy in these white flowing robes with the long beard, and I mean, he looked, and this is not to try to make a joke. He looked like a younger Osama bin Laden. His beard was full black. He didn't have any gray in it, and he wasn't quite, I think, as tall, but he was a taller man. But he dressed literally the same way, and he's walking out, and there's a mosque right down the street from where we would be at in this one location, but the Muslims never came out because this is usually the time when they would be at prayer. And so you just didn't see them a lot in this. It's kind of a secular environment, a lot of bar hopping and stuff. So it's perfect for us, and apparently perfect for bar hoppers. But Muslims aren't going to be really in that environment. But I see him, and he's with a guy, and I'm like, and I just feel like I should start talking to this guy. And so I tell the lady, "Excuse me, just a minute, just a minute." And I turn around because he's passing behind me as I am listening to her complain about God's designs. And I say, "Excuse, are you a Muslim?" He's like, "Yes, what do you know about Islam?" And so we started having this conversation right away, and I found out that he was out there to do dawah, meaning that's the word that they would use for evangelism. Yeah. It means to invite people to Islam. So he's inviting people to Islam. Apparently he had made a contact with somebody, and he was out there to give them a CD of the Surah of Maryam, which was being sung in Arabic and then translated into English. That's a very common surah that a lot of Muslims like to first point, especially people they think are Christian. They like to point into that. So he was out there to do this, and the person apparently didn't show up. But him and I started talking, and all of a sudden I saw more Muslims out there than I'd ever seen. A bunch, and I found out later it's partially because it was Ramadan, so they were like there later, so they did kind of spill over to Mill Avenue afterwards to kind of see what was going on. So I'm having this conversation. It's going. He's like, "Well, why don't you come back to the mosque with us?" So we walk over there, and then I start talking to these other guys. The original guy disappears. Next thing you know, it's like 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, and I'm talking to these 2 college student Muslim guys who are more moderate in their views and this and that. And it was like this 8-hour experience, almost baptism by fire, accidental kind of thing just happened. Mm-hmm. And I went home, and I was like, whoa, and I realized it was a new world and all that. And then I kind of started transitioning to that, and I started linking up these guys who did masjid evangelism, where you go outside the mosque and you stand after they're coming out, and you stand in a public place and ask them if they like a Gospel of John or something like that, and have these conversations. And it started transitioning into that from that, and that's actually how one of the ways DavidWood and I started intertwining, and Sam Shamoons and I started intertwining, is because we had some mutual people because of those things. And that's how it ended up me doing, the skits and the parodies, such as the Boom Boom Room and Islamicize Me. Actually came out of that context. So that was where that turn happened.
Well, DavidWood is East Coast, isn't he?
Yeah,
was he living out on the West Coast at the time, or does he just come out and visit?
Well, so I followed his blog at the time because I was a big blogger. So my first foray into public space apologetics, because stuff that's being recorded, because all the stuff on the street, it's sort of lost into the mists of time. We weren't out there recording ourselves or really writing about it very much. You're just doing it week after week, right? Well, publicly, I started doing two things. Public radio.
This is Vocab Malone, your favorite urban theologian, street apologist, and semi-retired Christian hip-hop artist. I am on the microphone today as a radio host.
And that's a long, interesting story how that happened, and doing apologetics on the radio, and then blogging, because that was a much more major part of the apologetics landscape on the internet at the time. It's not that it's disappeared, but it's not this primary thing that I feel like it was in a lot of ways when I was first really getting involved on the more public level. So I followed his blog and saw he was coming to Phoenix, and then we kind of just ended up linking up and just met each other from there, and just kind of worked off and on with mutual people in various contexts.
Steadily learning, hear a fresh sermon. Jeremiah fired the kind that be burning. Now I got the yearning to put that sweat and work in. Yeah, aha, Mashiach, a Sunni, Mashiach, a tune thee. Yeah.
So we have some older interviews together we've done that I've since uploaded to the channel. They're audio only, but they're interesting because it's like you hear when we're kind of first getting to know each other and stuff like that. And it was later on that he was like, hey, I got these ideas, and since you go after Hebrew Israelites and you deal with Islam, you might be the guy to do that. What do you think of this? And he started telling me about it, and all of a sudden I started adding a bunch of ideas of my own. He's like, what? Including the name for the series, which was Islamicize Me at the time. I was like, Islamicize Me. He's like, oh, and he got it right away. Once he had explained it, he didn't know what he was going to call it. Okay. But he got it right away, and he's like, well, clearly you already, he saw and basically he asked me at the right time in my life and la. And so I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, bro. And then we just kind of started going on from there. And that's where a lot of stuff started transitioning more into the YouTube world of apologetics for me at that time. Had to do with sort of David's influence and our work together there. And that was a fascinating, it's been a fascinating journey since then.
Cool. Yeah, you guys have done some very interesting, entertaining stuff. Do my viewers a favor and explain to them what Islamicize Me is briefly, and also mention the Boom Boom Room and give us sort of an overview of what those are, and also what they're not, because I think the criticisms on both of those, and I'd like you to just cut those off at the pass and tell everybody what it is and what it's not.
Islamicize Me, I see as a 32 episode web series, and these are the facts of it, but a 32 episode web series that is designed basically to expose Muhammad as a false prophet.
We've agreed to follow the teachings of Muhammad for 30 days. What do you mean? But there are a lot of commands in Islam, a lot of Muslim sources. Sahih al-Bukhari.
Sahih al-Bukhari, 2797.
Sahih Muslim, 5300.
Allah says in the Quran.
In the glorious Quran al-Kareem.
In Surah 4, verse 34.
Ibn Ishaq. Sahih Bukhari. Sahih Muslim, number 3600.
Sahih Muslim, look at this, 5537.
Sahih Muslim, number 3597. Sunan Ibn Majah, number 1944. Sahih al-Bukhari, 2797.
Sahih al-Bukhari, number 63.
This is the life of Muhammad, Sirat Rasul Allah.
Here's something, Sunan Nasai.
Surah 9, verse 123 of the Quran.
In the Quran we are told.
Sunan Ibn Majah, number 520.
If you ever doubt Islam, just think about the miracle here.
Islam invented science.
Yeah.
Islam invented science.
I've heard that too. Yeah, that's true.
This could get interesting real fast.
What we have as a setup for this, Brian, is that three guys with a background in atheism are convinced to do everything that Muhammad says in the sources that are accepted down to a T without really much sort of other understanding, or just kind of like looking at the page and then doing it and doing everything. So not just the popular stuff, but everything that's there, right? The stuff that was not really as well known.
Sure.
So, Muhammad, it's said in one of the hadith, walks by a graveyard and there's two people who had freshly died, and he says, they're getting punished right now, but for minor things. And, he goes on to elaborate, and he says, one of them was a gossip, and the other one couldn't keep urine off of himself. And it's like, that's weird. So he's being punished for basically being unsanitary or whatever. And then you go to another hadith, and there's a explanation about how to pee properly. And Muhammad is quoted as saying half the punishment of the grave is from peeing improperly. So that actually makes it a big deal. And you're like, this is in the sources.
Now, let me interrupt here, because what people are going to say is that you guys are just picking weird, obscure things, taking it out of context, and just trying to make Muhammad look stupid.
Well, we do. I have no shame to say the goal is to expose Muhammad as a false prophet, but we're doing this with his own words and instructions and commands. The goal has never been to make fun of Muslims or mock Muslims. In fact, most of what we do, most Muslims have never done and would never do in Islamicize Me. That's kind of the point. The point is that if you fully go all the way at what Muhammad says, it looks like something different than what actually is practiced out, and it looks much worse.
Backpack. According to the example set by the Prophet Muhammad.
Backpack. What do I do if a fly lands in my food?
Backpack. What do I do with unbelievers?
Backpack! What does the Quran say if I fear rebellion from my mutter wife?
Looks like we've got some guidance from the Prophet himself.
Backpack, magic backpack. I'm the Mega the Mac attack backpack. With this sack reacts, I'm like a maniac. I got stacks of facts to keep you all on track.
And so,
but again, to clarify, you guys are trying to you're actually trying to represent what Muhammad actually said and actually commanded, right?
Yeah,
It's
we
not a
read
matter
from the
of
sources
twisting or
in the
distorting
series.
it, right?
Yeah, we just read directly from the sources in the series, and we usually have multiple sources per episode. And the thing is, we didn't even, someone could say, hey, you're just da-da-da. We didn't even get to all the things we could have got to. There's a lot of stuff that we were like, we could do this again. Or, there are things we never ended up being able to do as far as other instructions, such as forcing Christians to the narrowest, or forcing infidels, but that would be Christians as well, forcing them to the narrowest part of the road when you walk by them on the street. We're going to have this episode where we have a fight, but the Christians are like trained martial artists, and so we get beat up, because they're acting in self-defense, because we're put. Yeah, so so we didn't include that, but there's stuff like that. And the thing is, if you look at the history of Islam, things like that actually were practiced, especially during the medieval era, and even in the early medieval era as well, as Islam expanded out in a very imperialistic fashion. And as that happened, you have rules about how to treat dhimmis. These are the second-class citizens who are living in Islamic lands, primarily Christians and Jews. And we have a little bit of that Islamicize Me. We take my neighbor, my fictional neighbor in the series, and he becomes our dhimmi. And because of the economic pressure we apply to him, mainly through physical force, it's done all in a very comedic fashion in the series.
Yes.
He then converts to Islam to avoid having to pay the dhimmi. But the thing is, this really happens in a real macrocostic. We're doing a microcosm in a silly way. This happens in real life in Egypt, in Iraq, and in Muslim lands. What we're actually doing. So Islamicize Me is showing all that, and we really the people may say we pull no punches. We actually pull some punches to a certain extent, but we also push the envelope. And so the series is not for everybody. Did we go overboard sometimes? I'm sure we did.
What you gonna do, Kufar, when Allah decides to abrogate you?
To be honest, which ones are overboard, I'm not even 100% sure. Changes week to week, but at the same time, is the main goal accomplished? And is it educational, engaging, and entertaining? Yes, yes, yes. And I was glad to be part of it. And right now, re-uploading a special edition, which is edited by you, Brian, on my YouTube channel, so people can see the special edition.
I admit to nothing, but just to clarify, because again, well, first of all, the more I learn about this, the more is it even possible to discuss to accurately discuss the life of Muhammad in a way that is PG, like with could you make an accurate for children or family-friendly version? Would Caleb ever be able to air something that accurately describes what Muhammad was like?
Well, so you'd have to leave a lot out.
Right.
And that, I think that's exactly what a lot of Muslims, as well as, mainstream media, for example, I think that's exactly what they do.
Right.
Most Muslims, there's a lot they're not aware of that are in the sources. And when they see it, there's these ways around it for whatever reason. We had
contradicts everything else.
Well, yeah, that's why you have the doctrine of abrogation, which means you can cancel out earlier revelations with later revelations. Muhammad really did prescribe camel urine as something that would make you healthy if you're sick. And people in Muslim land still drink camel pee to this day. You can go online and find defenses of people discussing why they drink camel urine. That's not the only example. The Quran, to a lesser extent, but certainly the Hadith to a greater extent, tell you what you should do with people who leave Islam. Muhammad literally said, whoever changes his religion, kill him. And he means leaving the original of Islam. He doesn't mean kill Christians who become Muslims. He means one specific thing, and you can see it by the certain things that he did. So what do you do with those who apostatize? And we show that the sort of a silly version, we're not killing people, of Islam. Muhammad did say bizarre theological things about images and pictures and dogs and how that relates to angelic visitation and not. And he did marry the wife of his formerly adopted son. And then he really did. Yeah. So you could do it in a PG way, but you'd have to leave out whole events such as breastfeeding grown adult men, so they're no longer sexually attracted to a woman whom they have to spend a lot of time around, which, by the way, that was one of his solutions, which seems odd. An odd solution to alleviate sexual tension is to have the man, but you'd have to leave out stuff like that. But in Islamicize Me, we don't, and that's probably the most controversial episode specifically, even though we're not, we're not showing anything, obviously, but you're getting the idea of like, oh, okay, these grown men are okay,
Well, again, I want to make clear for my audience who hasn't seen this, and if you haven't, man, go to Vocab's channel and watch it because it's hysterical. Yeah. It's very, very funny. But you're not trying to make Muhammad look stupid by putting words in his mouth or by distorting the teachings. What you're doing is by finding the actual teachings and showing if we literally tried to follow all of the teachings of Muhammad, here are some of the things that we would literally be doing if we actually were trying to follow it. Which I think is like when atheists try to do that to Christians, they're like, we would have to not eat shrimp. Like, okay, if you're gonna try to force Levitical law and New Testament, yeah, that's what it would look like. But yeah, you guys are drinking camel urine and having donkey water and the
multa marriage, and so you'd have to leave that out of the PG-13 version of Muhammad's life as well as probably you couldn't include wiping yourself. People worried about toilet paper being run out, but in the sources, Muhammad says you can use rocks, and they got to be an odd number for whatever reason. You could do that. You'd have to leave certain things out. But we almost approach it to make it comment. So even though we read several sources in almost every episode, towards the end it's more dramatic, sort of an enactment. So we're not as source heavy in the very final episodes, although it's still there. It's sort of these are the ramifications that these choices have got us into as you get to the very end. We officially
all based on the commands of the Quran.
Yes, we turn into Islamic
sources.
we turn into jihadi warriors. So by the end, we're doing Surah 929 stuff by the end. But we kind of did it in a way. It's like, imagine the Three Stooges becoming new Muslim converts without much guidance other than strictly the sources themselves. And so that's kind of what happens. And that's the comedic effect there. But the idea is not to stereotype or anything or make fun of a Muslim person. It's Muhammad's teachings. And it's from the sources, so there you go.